We're 4 weeks into the federal government shutdown. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is still over in Asia. He's in Japan meeting with Xi Jinping of China later this week, a whirlwind of an Indo-Pacific stop for the President of the United States. Meanwhile, back home, we are 1 week away to the day to the New York City mayoral election that could change not just New York City, but the entire world. What has to happen between now and Tuesday? And finally, Tucker Carlson jumps yet another shark, a literal, actual neo-Nazi. No exaggeration, Nick Flynn is on the show. All of that and more in today's episode of The Josh Hammer Show. It's 4 weeks since the government shut down. Yes, it is October 28th. It was on October 1st, the first day of the month, that the federal government shut down. And there's really no off-ramp in sight. There is no viable off-ramp at this point in sight. The most important part, though, is this. The Democratic coalition, the Democrats' broader coalition, is already starting to fracture. Just overnight, a huge development coming from the largest federal government employee union, the American Federation of Government Employees, saying that they are ready for this fight to be over. So their president, Everett Kelly, saying, quote, it's time to pass a clean continuing resolution, so calling for a clean CR. Okay, this is the president of the largest union for federal government employees. This is as bread and butter Democratic coalition as it gets. The literal public sector union for nearly 1 million federal government employees. Everett Kelly, quote, it's time to pass a clean CR and end this shutdown today. No half measures and no gamesmanship. Put every single federal worker back on the job with full back pay. They ensure our skies are safe, our veterans receive care, etc., etc. So a huge fracture. The Democrats rely on public sector unions the same way that Republicans for the past 30, 40 years have relied on Sunday churchgoers. This is about as core a constituency as it gets. And they are here directly calling on their patrons, on their party, the leaders, that is to say Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer, to end this thing. Are they going to start feeling the heat? Well, I certainly hope so. Nor is it actually just the constituencies, nor is it actually just the public sector unions, nor is it just the intersectional brigade, the aggrieved coalition of interest, the post-2008 Barack Obama. No, it's not just the actual voters, the actual interest groups, the lobby groups, the caster groups that are lobbying Democrats to end this shutdown. No, it's actually many leading Democrats themselves. So John Fetterman, just over this weekend actually, calling for Democrats to end this shutdown as well. John Fetterman saying, quote, I do believe that there is a critical mass of my fellow Democrats that are dug in until there's an absolute ironclad kind of a deal. Dug in until there is an absolute ironclad kind of a deal. When he was pressed further on this, he said, let's just open it up. Let's just open up the government. And then, after opening up the government, then we can have that conversation, so says John Fetterman in Pennsylvania, to see if we can extend those tax credit deals, because I do believe there are enough Republicans that would like to see that too. So you have the largest union for federal government employees, a true bread and butter Democratic constituency, as well as a leading Democratic senator from one of the most important political swing states in the country, Pennsylvania, who is saying to Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, end this thing. Dude, get a deal. What are you doing here? And frankly, that question, what are you doing here, is the question I think so many of us have had for a few weeks now. The point that I've been making, and I've seen many others making there, is what exactly is the Democrats' point? What exactly is their stance? What exactly is their negotiating position? Frankly, it's a little hard to tell. If the Democrats had to condense their stance and to shrink it down into what folks in the venture capital community call an elevator pitch. If you were just sharing an elevator ride with a prospective donor to your startup company, what would your pitch be? Well, if Chuck Schumer or Hakeem Jeffries were in an elevator with one of the leading Democratic Party funders, a George Soros, someone like that, what would their elevator pitch be as to why they are putting the American people through this? What is your stance? What are you seeking to extract? It does boil down essentially to health care subsidies. It boils down really to the extension of certain Obamacare subsidies that, absent some sort of CR, absent some sort of deal, likely are to expire there. But is that really worth what is now the second longest shutdown in U.S. history? At 4 weeks old, this is the second longest shutdown in U.S. history. It is only shorter than the shutdown of the first Trump presidency, also brought to you by Democrats, back from 2018 to 2019. It was 35 days, so 5 weeks back then. So if this thing goes on until next Tuesday, Election Day in New York City and in the state of New Jersey and the Commonwealth of Virginia, if this thing drags on yet just one more week, we are already looking at tied for the longest shutdown in U.S. history. Now, typically speaking, when you have a shutdown of this duration, where the sides have really dug in their heels, you will generally understand exactly, or at least roughly, what the stances are, what each party is seeking to achieve. So back in 2011, 2012, during the Tea Party Congress era, back when John Boehner was Speaker of the House, there was a government shutdown. A government shutdown over what was then the kind of political buzzword of the day, sequestration, because Republicans were seeking to lock in discretionary spending gains. And they did. They actually successfully were able to do that because their side lined up like ducks in a row. They were all on board, both the establishment wing as well as the then ascendant Tea Party wing. And they were able to convince Barack Obama as president of the United States and Democrats in Congress to agree to definite discretionary, that's to say, non-defense spending budget cuts. Defense was implicated a little bit as well, but it was primarily focused on discretionary non-defense spending. But again, they did that because they were adamant. They had a clear, enunciated, principled position, and they stuck to it. The current shutdown fight does not resemble that in the slightest. There is no clearly enunciated position here. There was a vague reference to certain types of expiring Obamacare subsidies. There was a vaguely articulated desire to include more illegal aliens above all when it comes to the scope and breadth of taxpayer-subsidized health care, including but not limited to Obamacare, also getting into Medicaid. But they don't have an elevator pitch. They are not able to succinctly tell the American people what exactly it is they are seeking to achieve. And just to give you yet another example of that, go ahead and take a look at Dick Durbin. He's been around for a long time. He's actually about to retire. Dick Durbin, the longstanding U.S. Senator from Illinois, had this to say on CNN.
Hearing from this union, as you said, Everett Kelly, you called him a good leader, hearing them effectively side with Republicans and the president, does that have an impact on you?
Of course it does. I felt strongly for this union. Everett's a friend and is doing a good job, but we also feel strongly for these families and the possibility that other Republican actions are going to be closing hospitals and clinics and nursing homes across this country. This is a crisis situation. We should resolve it as quickly as possible.
It does not change the strategy that Democrats have employed so far when it comes to this shutdown, stare down.
No, as a matter of fact, I think we can resolve this matter as soon as the president's willing to sit down with Republican leaders and Democratic leaders.
All right, so Dick Durbin, unsurprisingly, digging his heels while simultaneously acknowledging, as even the liberal interviewer on CNN acknowledges, that this is a really big deal. That the president of the largest public sector government employee union has essentially, in the CNN interviewer's own words, come out against the Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries negotiating stance. Dick Durbin's still doubling down. Okay, that is his want. That's what he's been doing in the U.S. Congress for decades now. Good riddance, sir, when you retire. Hopefully something better comes from the prairie state soon thereafter. But they're flustered. And when you start to fluster, when you start to break in a situation like this, when you start to have prominent senators like John Fetterman, a.k.a. the only guy in the history of the United States to get smarter after a literal seizure, and when you have prominent Democrats like John Fetterman who are openly breaking ranks, when you have prominent public sector unions, prominent supporting groups that are publicly breaking ranks, you are not unified by very definition, by sheer dint of that fact. And when you lose your unity, and when you combine that loss of unity with the loss of a clearly articulable negotiating position, you're going to lose. And who in the world could have foreseen that the Democrats were going to lose this shutdown, that it was only going to be a matter of when and not if? Well, I saw that coming. I'm sure you probably did too. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to see this coming. Simply put, Mike Johnson, a Republican, is Speaker of the House. John Thune, a Republican, is Majority Leader of the U.S. Senate. And Donald Trump, a Republican, is the President of the United States. We'll hold aside the Supreme Court, which is also controlled by the right of center bloc, but the elected branches of the government, both houses of Congress and the White House, are controlled by one party. It stands to reason, even holding aside the lack of unity, even holding aside additionally the lack of a clearly articulable negotiating stance, the lack of an end goal, the sheer mathematics of it surely would have indicated to anyone who was even paying a modicum of attention to the subject that Democrats were in a world of hurt and that they maybe could have tried for a little bit of time to extract some sort of amorphous, undefined concession, but after a few days, after a week, I mean, at some point, guys, it's time to look in the mirror and figure out what you're doing here, because there actually are very soon going to start to be real world ramifications for this. I mean, just this coming week, this coming Monday, I believe, the federal government is going to run out of food stamps, aka SNAP payments. Now, look, we're not libertarians here on the Josh Hammer Show. You'd be hard-pressed to find a more libertarian, skeptical, conservative commentator than myself. I am very much in a common good, conservative, small, efficient, but robust and supportive government perspective there. So we're not libertarians. We absolutely do believe in the role for a welfare state. Nonetheless, some statistics here surely are relevant. There are over 42 million people currently on food stamps. More than $1 for every $8 we spend in our federal non-defense discretionary budget is in food stamps. 1 out of every 8 people in America, according to my Article 3 Project colleague Mike Davis, who's citing the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, 1 out of every 8 people in America is on food stamps. Now, there is a big difference here between a legitimate need for a family who is struggling, who's just been laid off, single mother. If you actually have children who are struggling to eat, the government is going to be there to provide for you. There are very, very few people other than truly doctrinaire Ron Paul, Barry Goldwater types who would disagree with that. I certainly agree the government should be there for you. But there's all this garbage. I saw Elizabeth Warren, the communist from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, on TV this morning saying that all Republicans are going to take away your food stamps. Well, what they're not telling you is that these same people, the same Elizabeth Warren types, also subscribe to an ideology, as Elizabeth Warren herself infamously said back around the time of the 2012 Democratic National Convention that saw Barack Obama renominated. Elizabeth Warren had this deeply harrowing, discomforting, disturbing theme where she said the government is the only thing to which we all belong, trying to establish the government itself as the baseline of our entire community, as opposed to the more traditional places where you would find community, such as your church or your synagogue or your civic center, your YMCA, and so forth there. So don't confuse one thing for the other. There is a legitimate function for government to be a provider in truly dire circumstances. There is also such thing as a permanent welfare class. And the Democrat messaging is typically, expectedly, trying to muddy up the waters. But the point is this, that if those food stamps do expire this coming week, it's not just the folks who shouldn't be there, who are part of the permanent welfare class, who are going to lose the benefits. It will be the people who legitimately need those food stamps. And don't take it from me. Take it from Everett Kelly, okay? Take it from Everett Kelly, the head of the largest public sector union in the country, who is saying that Democrats are to blame for your food stamps if you lose them this coming Monday. Even more harrowing than that, the troops are going to eventually lose their paychecks. The active duty U.S. Armed Forces servicemen and women are going to lose their paychecks around the middle of the month of November unless this thing ends. Now, to be clear, that's not going to happen unless and until the shutdown reaches the longest shutdown in government history. It will at that point have surpassed the 2018-2019 shutdown and be the longest ever. That can't happen. If America fails to pay its servicemen and women, that is an absolute black mark on our collective resume, is a black mark on our collective conscience. It's something that never, ever, ever, ever should happen. And again, I would submit to you that there is one party that is fracturing, that has no discernible message, that controls none of the political branch of government, that is the party that will bear the blame, that is to say, if this tragically happens in a couple weeks' time. God forbid. That would truly be utterly disgraceful. Meanwhile, the President of the United States is not actually in Washington, D.C. at this time. He is over in Asia as his Indo-Pacific tour continues. So he landed over the weekend in Southeast Asia, in Kuala Lumpur, in Malaysia, where they had the red carpet roll out for him. There was this video that was going viral on social media of Donald Trump doing the little shimmy dance there, which he does. First of all, I mean, give the guy credit. Donald Trump is what? He's almost 80 years old. He's 78 years old, somewhere right around there. And the guy just has the energy of someone like a third of his age. I mean, I'm 36 years old. I genuinely feel like sometimes that Donald Trump has greater energy and stamina than I have. He probably does, to be honest with you. So first of all, just give the guy remarkable credit for that. So he gets this amazing welcome in Malaysia. The leaders of Malaysia are really quite pleased with him there. He oversees the signing of this peace deal between Thailand and Cambodia, one of the many under-the-radar, under-heralded peace deals that Donald Trump has overseen earlier this year. It's the Middle East stuff that gets a lot of our attention, this Russia-Ukraine diplomacy that gets a lot of our attention as well. There's been a lot of under-the-radar peace deals. In sub-Saharan Africa, there was the Congo and Rwanda, horrific tribal violence. Donald Trump brought a stop to that. In the Caucasus and in Central Asia, there is Armenia and Azerbaijan, a conflict that I saw firsthand, actually, when I was in Armenia over 2 years ago. We literally went to the Azeri border, a brutal conflict. Horrific, seething animus and hatred on both sides of that conflict there. The media here in the United States barely touched that one with a 10-foot pole. Unbelievable stuff. 2.5, 3 months ago, a remarkable peace deal at the White House. Literally, the leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan, they've gone to war multiple times in the past few decades, clinking champagne glasses, nominating Donald Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. Amazing stuff. Media decided to just totally not cover it. Incidentally, I mean, how you can have that and then not give the man the actual Nobel Peace Prize, I mean, just totally boggles the mind. But anyway, among these other peace deals, India and Pakistan, a huge one, 2 nuclear powers, but among them was Thailand and Cambodia. So the president, over the weekend, taking a victory lap by locking in not just that short-term truce, but that mid to long-term peace settlement when it comes to Thailand and Cambodia. Earlier today, on Tuesday, Donald Trump made it to Tokyo. I have to be honest, folks, I'm actually something of a lifelong Japanophile. Japan is a country I have been to numerous times in my life. I am a lifelong admirer of the Japanese people, Japanese culture, everything about it, just the aesthetics, the beautiful gardens. I think sometimes a lot about what the late, great British conservative Roger Scruton talked about when it comes to beauty and architecture and just this notion of objective beauty more generally. And how today's nihilistic, morally relativistic times, we have lost all conception of objective beauty, something that we see many times when it comes to these body positivity ads, Calvin Klein, Victoria's Secret, all this PC crap. But in Japan, which is not a Western country at all, you go there, you feel like you're literally in a different universe. Ironically, perhaps paradoxically, it is an Eastern culture that has really not been influenced by Western culture at all, but I think very much subscribes to these notions of objective beauty. And I really respect that when it comes to the gardens, the architecture. There's just really a lot to admire there. Donald Trump actually is also someone who is a longtime admirer of Japan. Not back in the day. If you go back to Donald Trump's clips back from the 1980s, back before the Japanese economy infamously had deflation and started crashing in the 1990s, they were back when Japan was really the genuine competitor. They were second in GDP to the United States back then. They had the rising automobile industry, the industry that really caught Ronald Reagan off guard. You know, a lot of the free trade absolutists kind of hold this out from Ronald Reagan's legacy, but Ronald Reagan actually put in pretty serious tariffs on Japanese automobile imports back in the 1980s, trying to save Detroit. An experiment that was broadly successful, at least until 2008, which is neither here nor there for present purposes. But back when Japan was the rising power in the 1980s, Donald Trump was actually very critical. He talked about how Japan would be dumping all these goods and parts and services on the international markets at reduced prices, and how they were engaging in all sorts of trade shenanigans, if not outright trade theft. Basically, all the things that he says now about China, he's saying about Japan back in the 1980s. But he seriously changed his tune. Donald Trump, like me, has become something of a Japan-ophile. And Donald Trump has just locked in a massive $550 billion investment. Huge. $550 billion investment. That's roughly 1/10, actually, of Japan's entire economy, of their entire GDP. So this happened in a meeting between President Trump and the brand new, hot off the press Prime Minister of Japan, the first female Prime Minister in modern Japanese post-World War II history. She was just sworn in last week, Sanae Takaichi. Go ahead and listen to President Trump and Sanae Takaichi talking about this historic investment deal.
Under the historic trade deal with the Prime Minister that is signed today and private sector agreements that were signed moments ago, we'll be increasing our commerce very, very much further. Japan's going to be investing $550 billion into the United States, and it's an amazing thing, and they're happy, and they're gonna love it. It's going to be really good. It's going to be a great for everybody. But building up an allied industrial base, and one of the things that makes me so happy is they'll be taking some of our product. Japan has, I don't think I'm saying anything that's very secret. They've been typically slightly closed as a country. It was not easy to come in, but they're taking some of our cars and a lot of our different thing, rice, which is actually a big deal because, as you know, they wouldn't do that. And they're taking corn, and they're taking the Ford 150 here, the big thing, some of our cars. So it's really a great thing. It's going to be great for them. It's going to be great for everybody.
So the car thing is actually quite humorous because Detroit is known, among other things, for producing larger cars. America is a large country. We have wide roads. We have big people. We have big cars. We have pickup trucks, SUVs, all that. If you've been to Japan, you know that Japan is literally the opposite of all that. It is a small country with tight, windy roads, with generally smaller people who need smaller cars. So there's been kind of a very humorous, kind of cross-cultural sticking point is the extent to which Japan has agreed to import American cars. I'm obviously painting with a very broad brush here. The big three American automotive companies obviously do produce plenty of smaller cars, but the thought of a Ford F-150 kind of driving through the streets of Osaka or Kyoto is kind of just a funny thought in my mind. Prime Minister Takaichi, again, this brand new hot off the press Prime Minister, keep your eye on her. She is a protege of Shinzo Abe, the tragically assassinated, another under-the-radar horrific story from a few years ago. Shinzo Abe was a long-standing conservative figure in Japan. He was one of the first real conservative leaders of Japan decades after all the World War II trauma and Hiroshima and Nagasaki and all that there. So this new prime minister is very much a China hawk. She's very much trying to kind of model herself as a Shinzo Abe protege. Trump and Shinzo Abe were famously close. Trump loved Shinzo Abe, the former prime minister of Japan. There's possibly no foreign leader that he loved actually more than Shinzo Abe. His relationship with Netanyahu is complicated. At times they seem to love each other. At times they seem to kind of love each other, but kind of also bristle at each other there. But he loved Shinzo Abe. It was just pure, unadulterated love. The new prime minister, Sanae Takaichi, again, the first female prime minister in Japanese history, very much a protege in that conservative right-center mold. She literally was actually physically jumping up and down with Donald Trump. Go ahead and watch this.
The first female prime minister in the history of Japan. Madam Prime Minister, please say a few words.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you all. 通訳。本日、米国の海軍創設250周年。
All right, so, I mean, how do you not love that? I mean, how do you not love this brand new, up-and-coming prime minister, just minted, hot off the press, a core American ally? Japan is a very core American ally in the 21st century geopolitical chessboard. Japan is one of the anchors, along with South Korea, the Philippines, and I would argue, ideally, God willing, India. But Japan is unambiguously one of the core anchors of America's strategy in that part of the world when it comes to containing Chinese hegemony. It is indispensable. It is incredibly important that the United States and Japan work very, very closely. Donald Trump is a heterodox figure. He doesn't always go along to get along when it comes to a lot of America's traditional allies. Sometimes that's for the good, by the way. Look at Vice President J.D. Vance's amazing speech in Munich, Germany at the security conference earlier this year back in February. That ruffled a lot of the holier-than-thou European elites that rubbed a lot of them the wrong way. Certainly there were a lot of Eurocrats in Brussels who were not particularly happy about that, but it was a fantastic speech, and it was frankly the speech that Europe had to hear at the particular juncture, at the particular time in history. On the other hand, Donald Trump has been quite aggressive when it comes to our allies, or at least former allies to the north, that is the country of Canada. One might plausibly argue that Donald Trump quite possibly undermined the Conservative Party's chances of taking back the Prime Minister office following the announcement that Justin Trudeau was on the way out. We're not going to relitigate that whole history here. I'm just trying to say that Donald Trump has a complicated history as administration when it comes to being tough on allies, easy on allies, so forth there. But Japan, Trump is an instinctual Japanophile very much like yours truly. And the reason that Donald Trump is an instinctual Japanophile is because he's instinctually an Americanist. And he understands that America's armed forces to this day have a massive presence on the Japanese islands when it comes to military bases in cities like Osaka, when it comes to the notion that we have to be able to contain Chinese hegemony in that part of the world. And Trump is going to sit down. He is sitting down later this week with Xi Jinping. That should come any day now. We are on pins and needles. I can't wait to see what happens at this meeting. The U.S.-China relationship is one of the more complicated developments in recent decades of American history. It is a story that is just filled with lots and lots and lots of different layers. And there is no easy way to predict exactly where it is going to go from here. After Richard Nixon first visited Mao Zedong in the early 1970s, something that I don't actually fault Richard Nixon for doing at the time, but which in retrospect was quite mistaken, he was trying to split the communist alliance between Moscow and Beijing. They were trying to cut off the Russo-Sino alliance at the height of the Cold War, trying to bring China back maybe into the American sphere of influence, but at least into the realm of Cold War geopolitical neutrality. Now, what followed even after that, following the economic reforms of the former Chinese communist leader Deng Xiaoping from the late 1970s into 1980s, the first post-Mao leader to really kind of start many quasi-free market reforms, emphasis on quasi. China's economy to this day is not exactly a free market paradise, to put it mildly. It is still a communist country there, but he started to liberalize parts of the economy. And then you fast forward to the late 1990s, early 2000s, even more. This is the post-Berlin Wall era. It is the era of neoliberal good feelings, the notion that free trade absolutism is going to rule the roost, the old Francis Fukuyama liberal thesis that the end of history is nigh. And you have China's ascension to the World Trade Organization back in the early Bush administration around 2001, something that was pushed, by the way, by a former senator from Delaware named Joe Biden. He was actually the lead proponent of getting China into the WTO, along with Dianne Feinstein of California. Ultimately, China ends up getting most favored nation status with the United States. And a lot of this was predicated, one, on the economy. The notion was that it's kind of the old Calvin Coolidge maxim. He didn't actually say this, but a lot of people think that Calvin Coolidge said back in the 1920s that the business of America is business. So translating that into the contemporary period, into the 2000s, a lot of people, I think, would say that what's good for America's corporations and for shareholders is necessarily good for America. But what a lot of folks didn't necessarily realize is that what is good for corporations is not necessarily actually good for America. There is a real difference here between the short-term interest of the profit motive and the mid to long-term good of the common good of the American people. This should have been easily foreseeable when it comes to things such as stripping out the American industrial heartland. When it comes to things like effectively allowing Taiwan, which is very much in China's sights, allowing Taiwan, and specifically Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, to become the be-all, end-all chip manufacturer in the world, a company that has a shockingly large market share when it comes to all of the advanced chips and everything from your iPhone to F-35 planes. I mean, who in the world could have seen it coming that it would be a problem to rely on the literal chips to power American war ships, destroyers, and war planes, to rely on those chips from an island Taiwan that's like 50 to 60 miles off the coast of America's number one arch geopolitical rival. I mean, who in the world could see that coming? Unbelievable, right? I mean, just unbelievable, the lack of foresight there. But anyway, a lot of that is going to be on the negotiating table this week. A lot of that is going to be on the negotiating table this week there. We will have to see what Donald Trump does there. The key thing to remember is that America holds the leverage. America fundamentally holds the leverage in the bilateral U.S.-Chinese relationship. There are a lot of folks like myself who have for years been clamoring for robust, meaningful steps to try to disentangle the American and Chinese economies as much as possible. As much as possible. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's even feasible, frankly, in the mid to long term. Who knows? But some steps, some positive concrete developments towards that simply must happen here. And I would like to think that that's what Donald Trump and his Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, are going to be trying to do when they actually meet mano a mano, face down with Xi Jinping in China later this week. I certainly cannot wait to get all the reports there. Hopefully they'll have a camera in the room there. China is very much a focal point here on the Josh Hammer Show. Meanwhile, back home, we'll bring it back home. We are now 1 week to the day. 1 week to the day until Election Day in New York City, in New Jersey, the Commonwealth of Virginia. We'll hold New Jersey and Virginia for now. I want to return to the New York City mayoral race. We did a deep dive in yesterday's show on the radical red-green alliance, Islamist Marxist, Karl Marx quoting communist radical, that is Zohran Mamdani. Someone who makes Barack Obama look positively moderate by comparison. Yes, he literally really does do that. Shocking. I mean, that is truly how far this party has gone in just the past 15 years. By the way, a lot of folks on the left are kind of doing the old 2008 hope and change Barack Obama kind of fanboy gushing. Oh my God, he's so sleek, he's so well-spoken. A lot of them are doing this all over again with Zohran Mamdani. For instance, here is Jon Stewart on The Daily Show calling Zohran Mamdani's mayoral run a Jackie Robinson moment.
I wish you all the best. Honestly, I think any New Yorker who looks at someone getting an opportunity, who's representing communities that have not been as represented, a Muslim, a young person, a progressive, a democratic socialist, there are so many different communities that are looking to you, and this, I hate to put it on you, as a bit of a Jackie Robinson moment. And I know that probably wields some weight, but man, oh man, what an exciting opportunity.
Thank you.
And I wish you the best.
Thank you.
Yeah, a true Jackie Robinson moment. What in the world is this guy's problem? Yeah, Jon Stewart, who was born John Leibowitz, if memory serves, from Livingston, New Jersey, who literally changed his name away from his very Jewish-sounding last name to try to make it in show business, calling this radical Sharia law apologist, Hamas-supporting Muslim guy a Jackie Robinson moment. No, Jackie Robinson was Jackie Robinson because there was literal de jure, like legal discrimination against black people. Jim Crow, in baseball, they had separate leagues. Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier because the nation was literally, actually, at least the southern United States at the time, was literally racist. Literally racist as a matter of state-enforced law across the entire former Confederacy. The notion that is even remotely equivalent to Zohran Mamdani is nuts. And by the way, more broadly speaking, this notion that this is a big deal to have any kind of quote-unquote Muslim guy running there. I mean, can we get a politically moderate Muslim? They absolutely do exist. Dr. Judy Jasser out in Arizona, a former guest on the Josh Hammer Show, amazing American patriot. The congressman out in Arizona. There's plenty. There's plenty of good examples. So if we're going to try to cross the Muslim political barrier, which I think we've already done, by the way, we have Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar in Congress, plenty of others, wouldn't it be okay to have someone who's not a Hamas apologist? Because the other implication is that you are Islamophobic unless you support a Muslim political candidate who happens to support Hamas. And if that is your definition of Islamophobic, then I'm pretty sure that pretty much every sane person in America is an Islamophobe. So you probably don't want to go down that rabbit hole of trying to make that your hill to die in terms of what an Islamophobe is. In any event, For the election, the purpose for our purposes here, the point is this. We're running out of time. We are literally running out of time. You know, I was on Newsmax yesterday. I had a TV head, and the host suggested to me that, you know, why doesn't Andrew Cuomo drop out of the race? Curtis Sliwa is the actual guy who won the Republican primary. He should stay in. Andrew Cuomo should drop out. Look, in theory, I agree with that. Sliwa did win his primary. Andrew Cuomo is the guy who jumped in with a quote-unquote independent run after getting his butt kicked in the Democratic primary by the radical communist Zohran Mamdani. The problem is that, one, Cuomo's not going to do that. Two, Cuomo is ahead of Sliwa in all the polls. As a conservative, my policies are closer to Curtis Sliwa. As a realist, I recognize that if anyone's going to drop out, that person has to be Curtis Sliwa. I'm sorry to say it, but reality sometimes kind of stinks. It is what it is. Reality sometimes stinks. And reality in this case means that if there is any chance whatsoever, whenever, to save New York City from the talons of a literal, actual, fire-breathing communist, and Hamas apologist at that, then Curtis Sliwa has to drop out. I literally just do not see any other way. Finally, deeply disturbing stuff. And I want to note that we're going to come back to this on the show tomorrow. We're going to bring on my friend Seth Dillon, CEO of the Babylon Bee, tomorrow. We're sure to get into all of this there. But I would be remiss if I didn't comment, at least for now. Tucker Carlson, who we have been very critical of here on the Josh Hammer Show. Tucker Carlson jumping the shark yet again. Jumping the third rail yet again. Having on his show this time, yesterday, Nick Fuentes, the nation's most prominent young neo-Nazi for a decade now. I literally blocked Fuentes on Twitter in 2015, if memory serves. And besides calling me and many other Jewish Americans filth and traitors who have no place in America and should move out of America, that this is not our home, etc., he's literally actually repeatedly questioned the details of the Holocaust. There is a video of Nick Fuentes that went viral at the time from 2018, 2019, give or take around there, of comparing Jews murdered by the Nazis to cookies baking in an oven. And this video of him kind of smiling wryly and just talking about cookies and how the math doesn't add up if you put the cookies in the oven and this, that, there, questioning the historical details of the Holocaust by way of analogizing Jews murdered by the Nazis to literally cookies in an oven. I mean, this is a disgusting human being. A loathsome, disgusting human being who, by the way, Charlie Kirk himself despised with a fiery passion. Perhaps no one over the years criticized Charlie and his now widow Erica more consistently and more passionately than Nick Fuentes. Because Charlie drew the line. We can quibble where he drew the line. I didn't like that Tucker still spoke at the Turning Point USA conference as recently as July, the one where I debated Dave Smith. I didn't like that. But he did draw the line somewhere. And Nick Fuentes and his quote-unquote Groyper neo-Nazi incel fanboys were not welcome at Turning Point USA. Just this morning, my Salem Media Group colleague Dinesh D'Souza released a text message exchange. I knew about this exchange. Dinesh debated Nick Fuentes back in August, September or so. Charlie was really upset about this. He thought that Dinesh was legitimizing Nick Fuentes. In fact, in these text messages that Dinesh has showed the world, Charlie called Nick Fuentes vermin. And Charlie personally encouraged me. He said, Josh, you should let Dinesh know you're not happy about this. I didn't do it because Dinesh totally eviscerated Fuentes, and I just thought I would let it rest. But Charlie Kirk despised Nick Fuentes. And here is Tucker Carlson, where the blood on Charlie Kirk's body is barely dry, bringing on Charlie Kirk's most long-standing, horrific nemesis on his show to have a, just asking questions, honest conversation about the Jews. For instance, here is Tucker himself talking about how much he hates, quote-unquote, Christian Zionists.
How do you explain Mike Huckabee, Ted Cruz, and there are a lot like that, John Bolton. I mean, I've known them all, George W. Bush, like Karl Rove. I mean, all people I know personally who I've seen like be seized by this brain virus, and they're not Jewish. Most of them are self-described Christians, and then the Christian Zionists who are, well, Christian Zionists. Like, what is that?
Right.
And I could just say for myself, I dislike them more than anybody. Because like what? Because it's Christian heresy, and I'm offended by that as a Christian. That's why. So I don't like. Why not? Like, I'm pissed at the neocons. Very pissed. I've said that a million times. I've been mad since December of 2003 when I went to Iraq. And so, like, I went and asked straightforward questions to Ted Cruz because that seemed like there's a sitting senator who's like serving for Israel by his own description. He seemed like a worthy target. I'm not going after MTG, who's like the most sincere like, why not go after Ted Cruz? I don't understand.
All right, so we will table a lot of this for a conversation with Seth Dillon tomorrow, but for present purposes, this. Tucker, literally a month and a half after Charlie Kirk was murdered, is now disgracing the memory and the legacy of Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk was literally a Christian Zionist. He posted a photo of himself praying at the Western Wall in Jerusalem just a few years ago, and he captioned it with one of the Christian Zionist community's favorite Bible verses, Genesis chapter 12, verse 3. Where God is speaking to Abraham, the patriarch, saying, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. By the way, in the Torah, that's Parsha Lech Lecha. We will actually read it in synagogue literally this Saturday, this Shabbat. Charlie was a big fan of that particular verse. He was a big fan of the notion that Scripture itself supports the Jewish people's right to their ancestral homeland. He was literally a Christian Zionist. Here is Tucker Carlson, a month and a half later, saying how much he despises Charlie Kirk. It's disgusting. We're not going to stand for it. Much more of this conversation tomorrow with Seth Dillon, but for now, just wanted to leave that with you. I'm Josh Hammer, and we'll see you right back here on The Josh Hammer Show tomorrow.